On August 15, 1945, the Japanese heard the voice of their emperor for the first time as he broadcast the surrender of Japan to conclude World War II. Emperor Hirohito urged the Japanese to bear the unbearable and endure the unendurable. But over the next 30 years, the Japanese economy rose in an unprecedented way to rank second in the world, behind only the United States. Hi, you're listening to The Why in History. I am Ajay Kaul, and today we're going to look at Japan's unprecedented rise to become an economic superpower, which is often termed the Japanese miracle. Following World War II, Japan attained full independence and sovereignty in April of 1952. Whoa, wait. Independence from who? The short answer? The United States. After Japan's surrender, the United States had two primary objectives in Japan. The first was to ensure that Japan never went into war again. And the second, which was tied to the first, was to ensure that Japan turned democratic and became an ally of the United States. So as ironic as it may sound, the biggest enemy during World War II was expected to turn ally. And the primary reason for this was that the United States was looking at Japan to counterbalance the rising tide of communism in the East, fueled by the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China. And to achieve these goals, the United States virtually rewrote Japan's constitution. The new constitution was written under the supervision of General Douglas MacArthur and did incorporate some ideas and inputs from the existing constitution. The new constitution converted Japan into a parliamentary democracy in line with the British model, and the role of the emperor was significantly reduced to a mere figurehead. The United States looked upon Emperor Hirohito as a key individual in cementing the new relationship with the United States, but he was demoted from a divine ruler to a mere symbol of the state. The Constitution also included strong individual rights and significantly advanced women's rights. Now, all this is important because some of these changes laid the foundation for Japan's rise as an economic superpower. Subsequently, the sovereignty of Japan was restored on April 28, 1952, under the San Francisco Peace Treaty, which formally ended the Allied occupation of Japan. As the Americans were rewriting the Constitution of Japan, the Cold War tensions started brewing. And the US realized that just rewriting the Constitution was not enough. Japan needed to experience an economic recovery. And towards achieving that, in 1948, Detroit Bank President Joseph Dodge appeared on the scene. The 1948 Dodge Plan envisioned bringing back Japan to full economic strength, ultimately removing American aid. The Dodge Plan introduced three basic policies, and the aim was to curb inflation and ensure economic growth. These three basic policies were introduction of a balanced budget, suspension of new loans from the Reconstruction Finance Bank, and complete elimination of subsidies. The loans from the Reconstruction Finance Bank were looked upon as being the root cause of inflation. So, did the Dodge Plan set Japan on a path to economic recovery? On the contrary, Japan entered recession. Whoa, and how did it get out of it? The simple answer? The 1950 Korean War. The Korean War created a massive demand for goods and services from the US military, and Japan was identified as a crucial logistics hub to provide these goods and services. The US needed supplies for its forces fighting the war, and Japanese companies started getting orders for everything from uniforms and food to vehicles and steel, and this injected vital dollars into the Japanese economy. The injection of dollars into the Japanese economy swelled its foreign exchange reserves, and it also led to long-term investments and massive technological upgrades. To support the war effort, Japan transformed its naval bases into commercial ports, and these were used to move troops and supplies and repair ships. And this laid the groundwork for Japan becoming a logistics and shipping hub for world trade. By the end of this war, the recession had ended and Japan was well on its way to economic recovery. But the war also taught the Japanese very important lessons, which influenced future economic policies greatly. And the first of these was the Yoshida Doctrine from Prime Minister Yoshida Shigeru, who's often called the father of modern Japanese economy. Management is all about working with constraints, but great managers use these constraints to their advantage. And that's exactly what Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida did in his Yoshida Doctrine. Yoshida realized that with the US having a military presence in Japan and not wanting Japan to show any aggression towards its neighbors, Japan could channel all of its money towards economic development instead of defense. And this formed the basis of the Yoshida Doctrine. So while the Korean War was still in progress, the Yoshida Doctrine relied on the United States for national defense, dedicated national resources to rebuilding the economy, trade, and industrial development, and avoided entanglement in international political conflicts. All this sounds great, but the devil is always in the details. So who was implementing these policies? The Ministry of International Trade and Industry, or MITI, was established in 1949 with the purpose of running Japan's industrial policy, funding research, and directing investment. During the course of the Korean War, there were a couple of things that stood out to the planners at MITI. One was the importance of heavy industry, like steel, shipbuilding, chemicals, and machinery. And second was the realization that to be prosperous, Japan needed to be globally competitive. So the main targets that MITI focused on for growth were in the industries of steel, shipbuilding, chemicals, and machinery. These industries were thought of as having large and rapidly growing world markets, and expanding these industries was the key to entering these international markets. To ensure global competitiveness, MITI facilitated bringing foreign technology from companies like IBM to Japanese firms through licensing and joint ventures. And to ensure that Japanese products were globally competitive, MITI helped create an export-driven economy, shifting from basic goods to high-quality, high-tech products. In essence, MITI operated under the premise that capitalism needed to be managed, not worshipped. So while the Yoshida Doctrine laid the groundwork for Japan's economic growth and development, it was another Prime Minister, Hayato Ikeda, whose income doubling plan of 1960 saw the Japanese economy really take off. Incidentally, Ikeda was the finance minister when Shigeru Yoshida was the Prime Minister of Japan. Ikeda was brought into the cabinet because of his outstanding grasp on economic policy and statistics, and did contribute to the formation of the Yoshida Doctrine. But once he became Prime Minister in 1960, Hayato Ikeda introduced the income doubling plan, which sought to double the size of the Japanese economy in 10 years, which meant that Japan had to maintain an annual growth rate of 7.2% over the next 10 years. So what were the results of the income doubling plan? The results were simply outstanding. The Japanese economy grew at an average rate of about 10% annually during the 1960s. National income doubled in just 7 years by 1967, well ahead of the 10-year deadline. And overall, Japan became the world's second largest economy, surpassing West Germany. One interesting fact, though, to be aware of is that the income doubling plan was launched as a distraction against the massive ANPO protests that came about between 1959 and 1960 to protest the renewal of the US-Japan Security Treaty. There was a massive outcry against US military bases in Japan, and these led to the ANPO protests of 1959-60, which ultimately led to the resignation of Prime Minister Nobusuke Kishi at the time. So when Hayato Ikeda took over as Prime Minister in 1960, his aim was to move the focus away from the political turmoil towards economic growth. And since the income doubling plan also prioritized social welfare, education, and infrastructure, it resonated with the average Japanese citizen, and the focus gradually shifted towards economic growth and development away from the US military bases in Japan. A very important and critical factor that helped accelerate Japan's economic growth were its human resources. As the Japanese returned from the war from various regions in Asia where they had been positioned, there was a very large increase in domestic labor. But this allowed for wages to rise less than the labor productivity in the 1950s. Even in the 1960s, productivity kept pace with wage increase, and that kept inflation in check and gave the firms the ability to be efficient and grow. While the abundance of labor was a huge factor in the economic growth, the innovation that this labor brought into the industrial processes was the other equally contributing factor in Japan's economic growth. Japanese companies took American-developed technology like TVs, calculators, cars, and refined them, making them smaller, more reliable, affordable, and energy efficient. Concepts like Kaizen, that is continuous improvement, and lean production, which was introduced by Toyota, reduced waste, lowered costs, and enhanced quality across industries. The thought process was that every industrial process or operation could be made better, more reliable, and more efficient. A fierce competition was introduced within the domestic market between various industrial groups, and this led to Japanese products becoming synonymous with quality, making them highly competitive in international markets. So stiff competition domestically to make products competitive internationally. Many companies across the world have tried the concept of continuous improvement. But why was it so successful in Japan? The primary reason? Lifelong employment. Japan's business houses realized that one of the best ways to ensure top productivity from their employees was to guarantee lifelong employment. That ensured workers were totally focused on their job, not worried about their future, and the business houses on their part ensured that they invested in these workers because they were going to be with them for a long period of time. Since the workers had been with their respective businesses for a long period of time, they on their own developed a deep understanding of the processes and the inefficiencies associated with each process and were able to make the changes to make the processes more efficient. But there was another factor that played an important role in the success of the continuous improvement concept. The keiretsu, that is the business conglomerates that were an integral part of the Japanese economy. Prior to and during World War II, the Japanese economy was primarily run by family-controlled businesses known as the zaibatsu. When the United States rewrote the Japanese constitution post-World War II, one of their targets were the Zaibetsu because it was felt that they had provided a lot of support to the war effort. And the United States did not want the powerful family businesses controlling the political future of Japan. Companies like Mitsubishi, Mitsui, and Sumitomo were some of the powerful family-controlled Zaibetsus. So as part of the rewriting of the Japanese constitution, the Zaibetsu were dissolved. But not for too long. Japan had experienced success around this concept of the Zaibetsu. So post-World War II, it slowly re-emerged as a new incarnation, the Keiretsu. The Keiretsu were not family-owned, but more of bank-centered networks or supply chain alliances. Companies within the Keiretsu bought shares in each other, and this created stability, encouraged innovation, and discouraged hostile takeovers. Companies within the Keiretsu relied on each other for capital, raw materials, and this created mutually beneficial internal economies. Overall, there were two types of Keiretsu. The horizontal, which comprised diversified groups across industries, and these were centered around a bank and shared capital and resources. Prominent among these were Mitsubishi, Mitsui, and Sumitomo. Yes, the prominent Zaibetsu re-emerged as equally prominent Keiretsus. The second category were the vertical Keiretsus, which comprised tightly integrated supply chains which linked suppliers, manufacturers, and distributors within the specific industry. And prominent Keiretsus in this category included Toyota, Nissan, and Honda. And because of this system of tightly knit and well-integrated companies, the Japanese were able to boost quality, optimize costs, and build efficient processes across an entire industry. The result was that Japan's trade surplus surged in the 1970s and exploded in the 1980s. Now, Japan's economic resurgence was based upon this export-driven economic model. And as its trade surplus boomed in the 1980s, it became a global issue. Because several developed countries across the world, including the United States, started seeing a massive trade deficit with Japan. And this ultimately led to the Plaza Accord being signed by major economies in 1985, where the depreciation of the US dollar was agreed upon so that the Japanese exports could be made more expensive. But even after the depreciation of the dollar, the trade deficit situation within the US and other countries did not improve. And this led to tariffs. 100% tariffs on certain electronics and several export restrictions on autos and steel. And the US president to impose those tariffs and restrictions was Ronald Reagan. But from 1968 until 2010, Japan continued to be the world's number 2 economy before China overtook it to take the number 2 spot. And on that note, we end this section of the program. On to the quiz section. Question from the previous episode. Which US president used his hat like a briefcase, storing letters, notes, and even documents? Abraham Lincoln used his tall stovepipe hat like a briefcase, storing letters, notes, and documents to keep them handy. He had a compartment sewn into the lining for this purpose, which helped him organize papers during his time as a lawyer and later as president. So the answer is D, Abraham Lincoln. Question for the current episode. Which American car manufacturer's worst performing plant was transformed into a profitable entity after Toyota took it over in the 1980s? Was it A. General Motors, B. Ford, C. Chrysler, or D. American Motor Corporation? Once again, which American car manufacturer's worst performing plant was transformed into a profitable entity after Toyota took it over in the 1980s? Was it A. General Motors, B. Ford, C. Chrysler, or D. American Motor Corporation? The answer will be provided in the next episode. That's all we have in today's episode. We meet again in 2 weeks with another interesting and exciting episode on world history. Till then, stay safe and keep exploring the why in history.